never thought a cake and 16 candles could be the end of my life as I knew it. But there I was, standing in the middle of our living room, just seconds after blowing out the flame, when my dad's face went from forced cheer to a mask of pure cutting ice. He didn't just yell, he took the entire perfectly frosted cake, the one I had picked out myself, and smashed it onto the floor, the sound of glass and buttercream exploding like a bomb. Then he pointed a shaking finger at the front door and said, "Get out. You are not my daughter. You are a lie, and I want you gone, now." I stood there, frozen, 16 years old, covered in sprinkles and humiliation, while he repeated the command with a venomous snarl that made my stomach churn. I didn't even have a coat, just the flimsy, cheap dress I'd been so excited to wear. As I stumbled out onto the porch, clutching the only present I'd received, a silver locket from my aunt, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. A distinguished-looking man, dressed in a suit that cost more than our house, stepped out, walking past my father without a glance. He stopped right in front of me, his expression grave but kind, and he said 3 words that completely derailed my universe. "You've inherited everything." Everything he meant from the grandfather I'd never known existed, a man whose wealth was apparently staggering, but there was one caveat, one condition that made my already impossible situation even more complex. Before I dive into the sheer madness of that night and everything that followed, tell me, was I wrong to walk away from the only family I had, right then and there, when faced with an escape route that seemed too good and too suspicious to be true? My life before that night was, for lack of a better word, quiet desperation. My name is Elara, and I lived with my father, David, in a small, perpetually dusty house that always felt too cold, no matter the season. My mother, Sarah, had passed away when I was only 5, a loss that left a gaping, silent hole in our lives. Dad never talked about her, not really. Her pictures were kept in a sealed box in the attic, and if I ever brought her up, he would shut down, his face hardening, his eyes going distant and sad. His silence was the first sign that things weren't right. The second was his overwhelming protectiveness, which bordered on paranoia. I wasn't allowed to have friends over. I wasn't allowed to stay out past sundown, even in the summer. He monitored my internet usage, and every phone call was a potential interrogation. I was homeschooled for a few years, which isolated me even further, until the local authorities insisted I enroll in public school. A change he fought tooth and nail, only relenting when threatened with legal action. He always told me, "Elara, you are special and the world is dangerous. You must be careful what you say and who you trust. People want what we have." But we had nothing, at least nothing visible. We were Perpetua. Lai struggling to pay bills, and his job as a low-level accountant seemed to barely cover the essentials. I always assumed the what we have he was talking about was just our quiet, secluded life. I spent most of my childhood in our small library, which was strangely well-stocked with classics and obscure legal texts. It was in those books that I found my escape and my education, developing an intense interest in history and complex legal structures. My 16th birthday had been approaching, and I had foolishly hoped it would be a turning point. I thought perhaps for one night Dad would let down his guard, and we could just be normal. I invited my only 2 school friends, Liam and Chloe, over, a privilege he had grudgingly granted only after a week of pleading. The party was awkward, to say the least. Dad hovered like a specter, correcting my friends' posture and interrupting their small talk. He kept eyeing the silver locket that my Aunt Carol had sent, the only piece of jewelry I owned. Aunt Carol was Dad's sister, and their relationship was strained, to say the least. She lived in a different state and only communicated via mail, but she always sent me a small, meaningful gift for my birthday. "This locket," she wrote in the accompanying card, "was a key to a past you deserve to know." Dad had snatched the card and crumpled it immediately, but I managed to slip the locket on before he could object to the gift itself. I was holding the slice of cake my friends had sung over, just about to take the first bite, when the doorbell rang. The man standing on our porch, the one who ruined my miserable little party, introduced himself as Mr. Elias Thorne, and he was the epitome of old money. His suit was Savile Row, his shoes gleamed, and his voice was deep, cultured, and carried an undeniable authority. He didn't ask to come in, he simply looked at my father, who instantly turned pale, a color I'd never seen on him before. "David," Mr. Thorne said, his voice flat. "The pretense is over. She is 16 today. It's time." Dad's composure completely shattered. He looked from Mr. Thorne to me, his eyes wide and panicked. The friends immediately fled, sensing the shift in the air, and that's when Dad did the unthinkable. He grabbed the cake and unleashed that torrent of icy rage and unbelievable accusations. "She's a lie," he screamed at Mr. Thorne. "I raised her, I protected her from you people. She is mine." He was hysterical, manic, and in that moment, I knew I was witnessing a breakdown, but it was a breakdown rooted in a shocking secret. As I stood on the porch, my face smeared with cake and tears, watching the man who raised me lose his mind in the doorway, Mr. Thorne simply offered me a crisp white handkerchief. "Elara," he said, his tone softening, "I apologize for the dramatics. Your father is protective to a fault. My name is Elias Thorne. I was and remain the chief legal counsel for your late maternal grandfather, Alistair Vance. You ever knew him because your mother, Sarah Vance, was estranged from him. And when she passed, your father deliberately concealed his identity and his existence from you. But Alistair never forgot you. He was the wealthiest, most influential man in this city, and he passed away 6 months ago. Today, on your 16th birthday, his will is officially executed. You, Elara Vance, are his only heir. You have inherited his entire estate, the corporations, the properties, the trusts, the art collection, the works, everything." I stared at him, my mind reeling. My name wasn't Elara Vance, it was Elara Davis. Or was it? The sheer weight of the information was crushing. A grandfather, a man of staggering wealth, a secret mother had kept, and a lie my father had lived. I felt like I was floating outside my own body. "Inherited everything?" I managed to whisper, the word sounding alien on my tongue. Mr. Thorne nodded. "Everything, but it is not unconditional." This was the catch, the ominous shadow hanging over the sudden, unbelievable sunshine. "Alistair was a man of specific principles and deep suspicion of your father. His will is very clear. To take control of the estate, you must meet one condition immediately, and it is a difficult one." He paused, looking me straight in the eye. "You must sever all legal and personal ties with David Davis, permanently. You must sign a legal document relinquishing him as your guardian, and you must never communicate with him again. Your grandfather made this explicit. He did not trust David and believed he would exploit you and the fortune. He stipulated that if you maintained any relationship with your father, the entire estate would be liquidated and donated to charity. You have to choose, Elara. Right now. Your old life or your new one." The gravity of his words hit me with the force of a tidal wave. My father, the man who had loved me, albeit strangely, was standing inside, screaming that I was a lie. The whole foundation of my life had been revealed as a meticulously crafted fiction. But he was still my father. He raised me. Could I really abandon him? Cold turkey. Based on the word of a man I'd just met, on the wishes of a grandfather, who didn't even bother to meet me when he was alive. Yet the thought of that dusty, cold house, of the suffocating loneliness, and the realization that my father had deliberately hidden my entire maternal lineage, a lineage of wealth and power, felt like a betrayal that cut deeper than any screaming fit. He wasn't just protective, he was a kidnapper of identity. Mr. Thorne saw the struggle on my face. "I know this is overwhelming, Elara, but I need your answer tonight. This cannot wait. I have a car, a safe house prepared, and a team of lawyers waiting to begin the transition. If you say no, I walk away and you stay here. If you say yes, your life changes forever, right now." I looked back at the open door, where my father was now slumped on the ground, sobbing, the wreckage, the cake around him. His grief looked real, but so did the manipulation that had governed my life for 16 years. The silver locket on my neck, Aunt Carol's gift, suddenly felt like a heavy anchor. I knew Aunt Carol was Dad's sister, but she had sent a gift that spoke of my mother's family, the Vance side. Perhaps she was trying to tell me something. Perhaps she knew this day was coming. I made my decision then and there. I looked at Mr. Thorne, my voice shaking but firm. "I choose the inheritance. I choose to know the truth." He gave a curt nod, his expression unreadable, and helped me into the sleek black sedan. As the car pulled away, I glanced back and saw my father running out onto the porch, his eyes wild, screaming my name. I'd a gold digger. But my intuition, the one I had honed in my father's suspicious house, told me there was more to the story. I was an heiress now, with access to everything, but I didn't have peace. So that's the situation I was in, suddenly free but shackled by a moral dilemma and a final binding choice. Before I tell you what I found hidden in that locket, and how it led to a confrontation that brought everything to a head, I want you to pause and comment below. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have signed the document, securing the wealth and your freedom, or would you have risked it all for the possibility of a final true conversation with your father? I didn't sign the document that day. Instead, I told Mr. Thorne I needed a few more days to process the finality of the decision. He was visibly annoyed but couldn't force my hand. That night, I finally took the silver locket off my neck and examined it closely. Aunt Carol's cryptic message about it being a key to a past you deserve to know suddenly made sense. It wasn't just a sentimental gift. I noticed a tiny, almost invisible seam along the edge. With a trembling hand and a thin letter opener, I managed to pry it open. Inside, tucked away in the hollow chamber, wasn't a picture, but a minuscule rolled-up piece of paper, smaller than my pinky nail. I carefully unrolled it to find tiny, almost microscopic writing. It was a single line of coordinates and a date, and under it 2 words, the truth. The coordinates led to an old abandoned bank vault in the heart of the city, a building the Vance Corporation still technically owned but hadn't used in decades. I immediately knew this was something my mother had left behind. She must have known, or suspected, that one day I would need to find the truth outside of the narrative set by either my grandfather or my father. I used my new influence, citing an inspection for corporate assets, and Mr. Thorne, completely unaware of the locket's secret, made the arrangements without question. The date on the paper was the day before my mother had died. Accompanied by 2 silent bodyguards, I descended into the cold, dusty vault. The coordinates pointed to a specific safe deposit box. Inside, I didn't find jewels or cash, but a thick, leather-bound journal and a final letter, both sealed and addressed to me, to my Elara, on her 16th birthday. I dismissed the bodyguards, citing privacy, and sat on the cold floor, finally opening the letter written by the mother I barely remembered. The journal was Sarah's account of her life, and it was a revelation. It detailed the suffocating, manipulative control of Alistair Vance, a man who viewed his family as mere assets. It spoke of her escape with David, the pure, genuine love they shared, and her determination to raise me away from the toxic influence of the Vance Empire. The climax of the story, however, was in the final pages. My mother hadn't died of a sudden illness as my fat. Her had always told me. She had been in a severe car accident, a horrific crash that left her hospitalized and dying. The journal revealed that Alistair Vance had found them right after the accident. He hadn't come to help, he had come to leverage. On her deathbed, he offered David a devil's bargain. Alistair would cover all the insurmountable medical costs, ensuring Sarah received the best possible care for her last days, and he would set up the entire inheritance for me, if David agreed to disappear, to raise me in secret, never allowing me to know my true identity or the source of my father's salary, which Alistair would secretly pay him monthly. It was a coerced deal of separation. Alistair wanted David out of the picture, convinced he was a manipulative leech, and he wanted me back into the Vance lineage without the messy, public drama of custody battles. David, watching the love of his life slowly slip away, and believing that a huge inheritance would ultimately secure my future, had agreed. He hadn't wanted the money, he had wanted the best care for my mother, and he had made a terrible, tragic choice. His paranoia, his secrecy, and his struggle with bills wasn't just emotional damage. He was constantly afraid Alistair would renege on the deal, afraid I would find out, and afraid of the man his wife had run from. He hadn't abandoned me or my mother for money. He had been forced into a life of lies for love and for my protection. My mother's last entry confirmed it. He's not lying, Elara. He's broken. Alistair is the danger, not David. If you ever have to choose your father. He kept his promise to me. Please, break free of Vance. I walked out of that vault, no longer an heiress, but a daughter who understood. I went straight to Mr. Thorne's office, the unsigned document clutched in my hand. He was expecting me to finally sign. Instead, I slid the will of Alistair Vance, the one with the condition, across the massive desk. Mr. Thorne, I said, my voice shaking with righteous anger, I will not sign this. The condition is refused. I choose my father. His face went slack with shock. You can't be serious, Elara. You're throwing away billions. Everything will be liquidated. Charity, you'll be penniless. I smiled, a genuine sad smile. That's the exact reason you kept my mother's journal a secret, isn't it? The sheer spite of my grandfather's final act, a fortune poisoned by control, with a mandatory act of filial cruelty. I don't want it. Let it go to charity. My mother told me everything. I choose the man who kept his promise to her, even if it destroyed his own life. The aftermath was exactly as Alistair Vance had dictated. I refused to sign, and the entire Vance estate, the corporations, the trusts, the houses, everything, was systematically liquidated and donated to various charities over the next few months. It was a massive, unprecedented event in the city's financial history, and I became the infamous 16-year-old who gave away a fortune. Mr. Thorne was furious. He tried every legal maneuver to contest my choice, but the will was airtight. I wasn't allowed to inherit anything, but I was also no longer bound by the condition. I used the one thing I had, the last known address of my father, which I found in Mr. Thorne's files. I found David living in a tiny run-down apartment, looking 10 years older and completely defeated. When he opened the door and saw me, he didn't scream or rage, he just collapsed into tears, whispering, "Elara, I'm so sorry." I didn't need an explanation. I knew the whole story. I simply walked into his arms and hugged him, truly hugged him, for the first time in years. We talked for hours that night, finally, openly, about my mother, about the immense pressure he had been under, and the impossible choice he'd had to make. We were broke, but we were finally free of the ghost of Alistair Vance. My father and I moved to a different city and started fresh. I went back to public school, thrived, and eventually used the vast legal knowledge I had gained from my odd childhood and the brief stint as an heiress to pursue a degree in international law. I work as a pro bono lawyer now, specializing in complex inheritance disputes, often for people who are being coerced by controlling family members. My father is my paralegal. He's happier than I've ever seen him, finally able to live without the crushing secret. We are living a simple, honest life, and I wouldn't trade the clarity of my conscience for 1,000 mansions. The greatest inheritance my mother left me wasn't the fortune, it was the key to the truth and the courage to walk away from a poisoned gift. Like this video, if you were on my side, if you think that a clear conscience and the truth is worth more than $1 billion, subscribe for more stories like this, stories of impossible choices and the secrets families keep. And please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Would you have been strong enough to walk away from everything? I'll see you all in the next story.